What are your night shift horror stories? Worked a parking garage at the airport. Cleaning the top deck and noticed about 100 ravens all over a truck with a tarp over the bed. Took my flashlight expecting something awful. Noticed as I got closer the smell and the ravens taking turns going in a hole they had torn open and popping out covered in gunk. Some guy left a broke down beater with a couple animal carcasses in the back to rot. No heads. Checked the logs and the damn truck had been there since November and it was April, so everything was just thawing and breaking down. Was an orderly in a hospital. 2 of us were sitting in the basement office adjacent to the morgue. A guy passed our office, looking at us a little shifty, came back again and asked if we had access to the morgue. We said yes, thinking he was doing a pickup for a funeral home, but that seemed strange given it was around 12 o'clock to 12:30 a.m. Nope. He wanted to pay us to let him in, and leave him alone with the bodies for an hour. We escorted him up to security. Apparently he had tried it in the past, as security knew him. Worked at a liquor store for a few years. One of the homeless guys, probably late 50s, that stood outside would ask for money, and 9 times out of 10 if they said no he'd flash them his old wrinkly crusty package. Had to chase him off every night so people didn't have to suffer that sight. Annoyingly, people who saw me chasing him off or threatening to call the cops often gave me dirty looks like as if I hated homeless people or treat them like trash. When in actuality I was saving them from that which you cannot unsee. This didn't become a horror story until recently, but as a teen, I used to close down the gas station/truck stop I worked at, alone. My boss used to pop up out of the shadows as I was closing down the till with the backup lights on. He'd be super calm and act like it wasn't creepy at 11 p.m. when he should be home with his family. He was even at my high school graduation, he and his wife's number still in my phone. Anyhow, he is currently on trial for murdering a prostitute via stabbing her to death, back in '94. Cold case potentially solved via DNA and modern science. Oh man, I hate recalling this story. I work night shift at a rehab facility. We have a protected gate with a camera looking down from above and one of those doorbell cameras. In the office, the camera monitor is on one wall and the doorbell monitor is on another. I was doing some paperwork and see this guy walk past, stop for a few seconds, then slowly turned around, walked back and stared up at the camera. And he kept staring. The facility is in a rough neighborhood, so I'm fairly used to folks hanging out around the gate and usually ignore it. But the way he was staring was off-putting. Like, his eyes and expression were hollow and dead, almost as if he were in deep thought about something horrible. I was pretty sure he was zonked on synthetics. I used the intercom to see if he was okay, but he just kept staring directly at the camera. We have a rule: if it's not hurt or trying to come through the fence, just let it be. No sense in engaging needlessly with somebody potentially hostile or messing with the locals. Y'all, he stood there and stared at that camera for 2 hours. That same dead-eyed expression staring right at me. I did a round and came back to find him gone, which only creeped me out more. Used to work nights at a Home Depot. There was one time where for a week or so our store stayed open 24 hours. For the most part this wasn't really a problem. Typically nobody comes shopping for home improvement items at 2 in the morning. Except that one couple that came looking for marble countertops at 1:30 in the morning, and the woman was wearing a nice dress. I guess there was also that one young lady who came looking for a toilet paper roll holder a little after midnight. I had just gotten off my first break, and she was wearing jorts and one of those white with black belt stereotypical karate outfits. She was oddly specific about which roll holder to get, too. But the real story lies within the insulation. It was nearing 3 in the morning and me and another guy were stocking insulation, as well as fixing the bays and some such maintenance. A bunch of big R30s had fallen in their bay, and while I was sorting through them a freaking hand came out of the mess and grabbed my arm. I lost my mind enough for not only the guy I was working with to freak out, but also for my boss, who was across the store, to come check out the commotion. Turns out a homeless drunkard had come into the store at some point, and I can only assume before the night crew showed up, and had made a nest in the insulation where he fell asleep. The dude was in bad shape, too. Like, far gone into whatever inebriation that we had to call the police to remove him. I was always a little more cautious around the insulation after that, for at least the time the store stayed open 24 hours. Not mine, but I used to work at a small hotel, and the manager there told me a terrifying night shift story. It was about midnight when she got a call at the front desk from a man. He said that he's with his 8-year-old daughter who dances competitively and needed advice on what she should wear. She gave him some basic fashion advice. He asked my manager, "What about fishnet leggings? Do you think those are too sexy?" Then proceeds to talk in graphic detail about how he thinks his own daughter has been trying to seduce him for weeks and how he's starting to enjoy seeing her dance in these cute outfits. Meanwhile, my manager is looking through a computer system trying to figure out who this man is so she can call the cops. However, the room he was reportedly in was empty. The man ends up hanging the phone up before she could find out where he was truly calling from. A couple months later at around 11 p.m. my manager answers the desk phone. A familiar voice asked her if she could help him pick out an outfit for his daughter's next dance recital. She asked him, "Let me guess, you want to know if she should wear fishnet leggings?" The man immediately hangs up the phone. I used to work night shift as a care aide in an old folks' home. It was already creepy. The home was an old hospital that was converted. Some a-hole kept walking around the courtyard after dark dressed as the Grim Reaper knocking on doors. It was actually really scary. He ran off and the facility got a security guard for a few weeks. Many years ago, I worked at a regional radio station in the middle of nowhere, Australia. I was the overnight operator, keep the overnight playlist running, set up for the morning, do all the manual checks for the next day, and jump on the desk if anything funky happens. I spent a lot of time sitting in what was essentially a tin shed in the middle of a paddock, with my dog, shoes off, listening to 50s and 60s music and doing crossword puzzles. Except one night when the roo shooters came through. They spooked the kangaroos in the paddock, and one of them jumped headfirst through our office window. So there's me, barefoot and half asleep, when this 6-tall kangaroo smashes through the glass window. Blood and glass everywhere. My dog starts chasing the kangaroo, I'm chasing my dog. And the kangaroo bounds around the office, knocking stuff off desks in the dark, bleeding everywhere. I ran and opened the studio bay doors, and my dog chased it outside. Where, I'm assuming, the poor thing, the kangaroo, was shot. Then I had to call my boss. Edit, Bandit, the dog, was fine. She lived a long and healthy life, occasionally being bullied by our pet cockatiel. Warning, medical gross stuff incoming. I worked in an emergency room. The worst night that comes to mind involves a patient that was bitten by a baby timber rattlesnake. He was bleeding out of every single orifice by the time he got to us. More blood than I'd ever seen before outside of a motorcycle versus 75 mph headfirst to asphalt. I don't remember how many doses of Crofab we gave him, but it was the hospital's entire supply. But trying to get him stabilized, arranging the helicopter transport to a bigger and better equipped facility, all the blood, those weren't the worst parts. The worst part was when the patient lost control of his bowels. I will never, ever, forget that smell. I spent the entire time standing by the door with a battery-powered fan and a handful of gauze pads saturated with cinnamon oil trying to reduce some of the smell. The doctor occasionally stuck her head out just so I could waft the cinnamon oil in her face. Yes, by some miracle, the patient did end up surviving, and as far as I know he made a full recovery. But the blood, the smell, and just the shock of it all. Yeah, never underestimate a baby timber rattlesnake. Used to work night shift at a 24-hour Walmart. Customers are nuts enough in the daytime, but they become weird after midnight. Once had an elderly guy come in wearing only a jean jacket and fishnet stockings. He came up to my register, leaned in, and asked if we carried anything to get rid of lice. Those plastic barriers all stores have now to protect cashiers? They need to keep those even after the pandemic ends. I lost count of the times customers got into my personal space to ask about products for fleas, lice, rashes, etc. I was once staying late doing some scenic painting in a college campus theater. It was late, pitch black dark outside and very quiet in the building. A few of us were up on the stage, not really talking, just taking care of business when suddenly I saw out of the corner of my eye something go very quickly by the open door to the lobby. WTF? Then it went by again and I actually saw what it was. A guy with long hair, wearing pajamas, and no socks or shoes. He was tiptoeing in a very exaggerated way, pulling his knees up very high, and grinning. WTF? It sounds kind of funny, but it was creepy as hell. We all made eye contact and one of the other painters was just about to go shut the door when the dude walked right in. He stood there staring at us for a full minute. You could have heard a pin drop. He threw his arms out to the sides dramatically and said, "I am your savior, Jesus Christ." No one responded and he eventually walked out. I guess he was hoping to get more of a reaction. The door was promptly shut and locked behind him and security called. They were not impressed. Turns out that he was a patient at some sort of group home nearby and had done this multiple times. I still get creeped out to this day if I'm working in a theater at night though. Overnight at the supermarket. Man stole the live lobsters and ran out of the store with them in his sweatpants. Like all in his pants. Lobsters falling out of his pockets, out of the cuffs of his pants, etc. Night manager running after him yelling. It was quite a sight. Also, one morning the newspaper delivery guy came to drop off the newspapers at 4 a.m. and some rando guy that seemed to be on drugs that I had just cashed out jumped in the newspaper guy's car and took off. Night manager chased him as he sped off. I'm a warehouse security guard in Indiana. I started on midnights and have since moved to seconds. It was around 4 a.m. and I was in the exterior part of my perimeter tour, and since no one was there I was singing a song, just something I like to do while I'm alone. I picked up the habit in scouts when we would go on hikes, so I'm outside. It's maybe 100-foot walk to the door I'm supposed to re-enter the warehouse with. I hear footsteps and an awful voice singing the same song behind me. I whip around and this dude who's basically emaciated, his eyes are bulging, and he's got a bunch of pock marks on his face is walking behind me. I shit you not, my asshole was so tightly puckered I could have sucked in a bicycle. Some freaking meth or crack addict had snuck up on me and he was less than 15 feet away. I asked him who he was and why he was here. He didn't respond and just kinda watched me. I told him this is private property and is closed at this time, he needs to leave now or I'm calling the police. He looks around, scratches his arms a bit and turns and walks away, looking back occasionally. He finally left property and when I was absolutely sure he was gone I bolted into the door. Scariest night I've had working there. If he hadn't started singing he could have done whatever he wanted to me. I have tinnitus and sometimes I hear noises that aren't actually there. When I hear footsteps nowadays I typically just chalk it up to I'm hearing a faint echo, because that's what it typically always is. Now whenever I hear anything I look to see what it was. I told my supervisor in the morning that I had to kick a person off property cause they were loitering after hours. Supervisor just kinda told me that stuff like that happens and it's fairly normal this close to the edge of inner Indy. Worked as a security guard, did a week-long gig working from 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. during setup and the 3 days of the concert itself. First had a plague of locusts during setup. Then on the second night of the concert one of my supervisors got targeted by a drunk patron who he kicked out earlier. The guy punched him so hard knocked his orbital socket loose. Finally on the third night, just when I thought things were calming down, we had the worst mass shooting in US history take place. I had to keep 6 people from bleeding out till cops arrived in my area backstage about an hour and a half later. My buddy and I were in the guard shack on an important entry point, like 100% ID checks, can't be expired, gotta double check against a list put out even if the IDs are valid, so if you're not on the list your ID doesn't mean a damn. It's around 3 a.m. and we're watching creepy YouTube videos during the time that nobody is coming through. He looks up and shouts what the F, I look up and scream like a little girl and nearly jump out of my chair. Dollar store Jason Momoa was just face pressed against the glass, grinning, and once he scared the crap out of us he laughed and walked in. Dude was as big as Jason Momoa and pretty similar looking, I mean dollar store version of him. 10 minutes later after we calmed down I looked at him and asked, wait, did he even show an ID? No he did not. As a former Walmart graveyard worker, I can attest to the absolute weirdest people coming out at night. I'm not sure what it is about 12 to 3 a.m., but that's definitely the sweet spot. The weirdest thing that would happen at mine was that periodically, a man, or should I say a typical Walmart brand tweaker, would come in, you know, tall white bald weird dirty sweatsuit type pants/shirt, and he wore a backpack. So first time you saw him you were thinking of course he's gonna steal. And he did, a lot actually. But that's because he was the fastest tweaker alive. The man had to have mapped the store out, because he was in and out of departments like he had an underground route. He'd stroll right in, someone would see him and walkie his location, he'd snatch whatever and simply vanish from hardware to suddenly appear in HBA. Then we'd run after him and he was gone again. It was honestly kind of creepy knowing that he could be around somewhere close, because he was always really messed up on meth or something. You wouldn't know he left until you heard a fire exit go off, that's how we knew he was gone. It wasn't a one-time thing, it happened at least once a month. Same guy, same operation. Sometimes I miss that job, just for the absolute crazy stories like that. As always, thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, show your support. Leave your thoughts and opinions down below.